Well, welcome everyone to this next lecture in our series Illicit Objects, Lived Religion. I am Joseph Sanzo, and I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Lived Religion here at Foscari University. And today I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Keith Edward Cantú. He is currently a research fellow at Foscari University of Venice as part of the Experiencing Transcendence Through the Arts project. And he's also a research affiliate at the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School, where he has also worked as a lecturer on South Asian religious traditions and as a postdoctoral fellow. His interdisciplinary research focuses on Indic vernacular literatures and esoteric soundscapes, especially those related to Bangla and Tamil and their interface with Sanskrit. He is the author of Like a Tree Universally Spread, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2023, as well as Depicting the Infinite Spirit, which is forthcoming with the Harvard University Press, I guess with the Center for the Study of World Religions. He's also a co-editor of City of Mirrors and has published numerous articles and chapters on topics ranging from yoga to global esotericism to Indian alchemy. In addition, he is also the developer of the digital humanities platform LipiSource. Keith received his doctoral degree in religious studies in 2021 from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Keith, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph and Piera, for the invitation, and it's great to be here in Venice as well, and enjoy the wonderful weather. Although it's been a little bit rainy, I guess, but sunny for the times I've been here. So this is a topic that I had sort of developed in response to the illicit objects topic and series. And it was interesting to think about this topic in the context of Bāuls and Fakirs in Bangladesh and India, since it's usually marginally treated or not really talked about in any given substance. And so thanks for joining me as we kind of go through this together and understand a little more about this interesting practice that is sort of used by a wide variety of people in what is now Bangladesh and Northeast India. So as you can see on the map, Northeast India is usually divided here into West Bengal, and then up here you have Assam and Meghalaya, and then you have Bangladesh, which is an independent country, used to be part of Pakistan until its independence in 1971. But prior to 1947, this was kind of all part of the British Bengal presidency, if that makes sense. And so it's only really in the past 80 years, I guess, that it's been divided. And so a lot of the ideas and things that I'll talk about are relevant to both Bangladesh and West Bengal. And I thought rather than sort of try to give you a description of who Bāuls and Fakirs are, who are these groups that I'll be talking about in the context of this illicit object, I thought I would just sort of open with a song, since I think that it sort of gives a little more clarity in terms of what they represent and who they are. So this is a common song. If you type it on YouTube or something, you'll find tens of thousands, possibly even millions of views of people who are listening to this song in various tunes and various forms. And this is kind of one of the most popular or common Bāul or Fakiri songs by the poet Lalon Fakir. So it kind of goes like this. So I'll take you through it. সব লোকে কয় লালন কি জাত সংসারে লালন কয় জাতের কি রূপ দেখলাম না এ নজরে দেখলাম না এ নজরে সব লোকে কয় লালন কি জাত সংসারে সুন্নত দিলে হই মুসলমান নারী লোকের কি হয় বিধান বামন সিনে পয়তা প্রমাণ বামন সিনে পয়তা প্রমাণ বামনি সিনে কিসেরে সব লোকে কয় লালন কি যার সংসারে Keo mala keo tos bigole. Taite kidrat binno bole, keo mala keo tos bigole. Taite kidrat binno bole. Zawa kimba ashar kale, zawa kimba ashar kale, zater chino roy kare, জাতের চিহ্ন রয় কারে সব লোকে কয় লালন কি জাত সংসারে জগৎ জোড়ে জাতের কথা লোকে গৌরব করে যতা তোতা লালন বলে জাতের ফাটা লালন বলে জাতের পাটা বিকায় সিসাত বাজারে বিকায় সিসাত বাজারে সব লোকে কয় লালন কি জাত সংসারে লালন কয় জাতের কিরূপ লালন কয় জাতের কিরূপ দেখলাম না এ নজরে দেখলাম না এ নজরে সব লোকে কয় লালন কি জাত সংসারে so you can kind of get an idea of the essential message of, Bāuls or Fakirs. It's very difficult to really pigeonhole or, label them from the top down in terms of, what they believe or practice, since there is a sort of a lack of emphasis on material or outward signifiers. And so since we're dealing with sort of lived religion and religious objects, I think this verse especially is really interesting, talking about the mala and the tasbih. People will wear different kinds of rosaries, but when we come from the world, when we're born and when we die, we don't really take those rosaries with us. So this was sort of the Lalon's critique at the time of the externalities. And if you want to learn more about Lalon and his times, there's a documentary that was made in the 1990s by Tanvir Mokamal, and also a feature-length film in Bangladesh, Lalon, and then a co-India Bangladesh co-production called Moner Manush, which could give some good, indications of the importance of this poet. And then this is the book that Joseph had mentioned, City of Mirrors, Songs of Lalon Shai, that I co-edited with a scholar named Simon Zakaria. And so in this talk, what I'll talk briefly about is who these Bāuls and Fakirs are from the context of that song and then moving forward. And then we'll dive into the practice of siddhi sevā or siddhi sevā, it's pronounced in Bangla, and what that entails. And then also the reactions and this kind of word, Ganja-khor, which means the consumer of ganja or eater of ganja, and how that kind of leads to the recharacterization of this practice as an illicit subject. So if we look at it through kind of a more classic religious studies lens, we see that there's a variety of movements that sort of converge into who are Bāul Fakirs and Fakirānis. And it's possible to analyze them through this lens, and I think important, since a lot of their songs connect to these various isms and practices and movements and so on. And this is nothing really new, because it's not just reflected in Bāuls and these songs, but it's also reflected in the manuscript culture and the architecture from this region. As here you can see, you have a colophon, or actually it's a vandana, a praise that starts at the beginning of the manuscript, and it's Sri Sri Radha Krishna and then Sri Ilahi Alamin. So you have sort of already this in mantra and in text, some sort of blending from this. This is a manuscript of Addo Porichoy, or acquaintance with the primal, from around the 15th century in Middle Bengali. But there's also another way to look at it, not from the top down and not through the dimension of text. There's also a way to look at it through ethnography, and to look at this practice of Bāuls and Fakirs, as many anthropologists currently do, but with an eye to the more religious studies aspects of them. And so during this talk, I'll be talking about these categories that are loosely overlapping. One is Bāul, which refers to this kind of wandering bard or singer, either from Vayu or Bajul, one who has a Vajra, which is that thunderbolt you might have seen in Tantric Buddhist iconography. The other word is Fakir, which is kind of a spiritual or mystical aspirant. It comes from this word Fakir, which means actually poor, but they don't treat it as poor really in terms of possessions necessarily. It's sort of poor as a sort of renunciate style in a way, and we can talk more about that. Then there's this word siddhi in Sanskrit, which is pronounced siddhi in Bangla, which means accomplishment, attainment, special power. In Sanskrit texts, there are these eight siddhis, sometimes other lists of powers, special powers. There's this word sadhana, also called sadhana, practice, striving for a goal or on a path. And then there's Sādhu, which is also overlapping with Bāul and Fakir. Sādhu is someone who practices sadhana. And then there's a dervish or dorbesh in Bangla, which is this kind of exceptionally spiritual advanced fakir. So you'll see in some of Lalon's songs, the poet whose song I sung, you'll see that he refers to his own guru or teacher as Dorbesh Shiraj Shai. So a dervish, not necessarily the kinds of whirling dervishes. So I know a colleague will be speaking on Hajar, who Francesco knows on either, I think, Thursday, a Wednesday or Thursday, but dervish in a kind of Bengali context refers to someone who has this sort of spiritual accomplishment in a variety of practices. And so one thing that kind of really comes to the fore when considering Bāuls and Fakirs are not necessarily the philosophies and doctrines, although those are very, very important. But one thing that really comes to light when practicing and understanding the daily life and immersion sort of in these kinds of communities, like what arises from that is this practice of servings. And so in Bangla, it's sevā, and it comes from the Sanskrit word sevā. And here you kind of get a sense of these various servings, water, fruit, tea, but there's also another serving, which we'll get into here. So what are these servings? I just mentioned the etymology here a little bit, Sanskrit seva, and it comes from this root sev, which means to attend upon or to sort of provide for. So it really is kind of similar to the English word serving, right? Which is you can serve someone, but you can also have a serving of something on a platter or something like that. And so these different sevas are called, and I'll pronounce it according to Bangla, pani sheva, jol sheva, cha sheva, fol sheva. So fol sheva is going to be a serving of fruit that you might get when you're sort of sitting and immersed in a Bāul or Fakiri context. You might also get cha sheva, so a serving of tea, pani sheva, a serving of water, and so on. And then there's also pan sheva. So pan is like a betel nut with the leaf. And sometimes you have what's called zorda added to it, which then creates a kind of concoction that is consumed. And that goes, way back, centuries old. During the Mughal period, there were even princes were also consuming it. And then you also have Sheva being referred to as specific meals at festivals. And so this particular festival of Bāuls and Fakirs is meant to commemorate a guru named Daulat Shah who had died. And you can see that in the comments here of what they were eating, someone is saying here, Mats Sheva Monohotse. So it's the serving of fish. And so it can also refer to bigger meals that people are eating. Now, it's important to realize that sheba as a kind of serving or meal is not the common word for meal in Bangla. So most people in sort of outside the Bāul and Sādhu communities, they will call meal kabar or kawa or something like that. And it refers to eat, to eating. And so the idea of Sheba actually is also linked to a world that's still more prevalent in the West Bengal side, although it was present in India more widely in Bangladesh in the medieval period. And that refers to this idea of Sheva that is offered to a specific deity. And so basically the king or the leader, the chief of a given region would basically host these pujas or rituals for various deities in which pundits or these learned people would come and they would offer basically meals and food and fruit to a deity in order to make the ritual successful. Now that's mostly in a Hindu context, but now, as I think I've made clear, we're dealing with something that is much more overlapping. And what we see is this idea, though, of Sheva also extended to this idea of Siddhi Sheva, from Sanskrit Seva. And this word Siddhi, as I mentioned, means accomplishment or special power, but it's also overlapping with what's called Tamok Seva or Tamok Sheva. And that is referring to a serving of tobacco from a Portuguese word, actually, tabaco. And so here you have something that is sort of entering this idea of the conceptual universe of seva, that it is something new, but it also has these traditional roots in the kind of broader context of an offering to a deity or so on, or an offering to the guru. And so here you have also siddhi is nothing entirely new, as you also have references from the 19th century of siddhi being referred to as bang, which is a concoction used with the oil of cannabis and prepared and then consumed in that way. And this is from Dominic Vojastik's article on cannabis in India. So siddhi is something that's also used in the Bengal region from the 19th, 18th, 19th century at least onward to refer to a cannabis style mixture. But how I came across this in ethnography was really mostly along the lines of this particular guru named Sādhu Humayun Fakir. And Sādhu Humayun Fakir had fought in Bangladesh's liberation war, and then he decided to kind of become a Bāul or Fakir afterwards. And he would have these festivals called melas or utshab that would happen after the memorial festival for Lalon Fakir, who died in 1890. And on this, you can see that that same song that I sung for you at the beginning, it's actually on this invitation card for one of his festivals, Jate Kirup Deklam Nai Nojere. So what is the form of birth religion? And so you could see the first part of this card, and you see it saying, Allah bol monre paki, say Allah, O bird of my heart. So you think, oh, maybe he must be a Sufi or a Muslim thinker. But then you see down here that it's what is birth religion's form. And so you see that there's kind of a wider conceptual universe here. But he would practice this idea of, or this consumption of Siddhi Sheva. And many other gurus, it's not just him, would also refer to this practice of Siddhi Sheva. And so, what is Siddhi Sheva? If you look at it a little more in depth, and kind of, since this is the talk that's based on the material aspects of it, then we can see that there are actually very specific materials, each with their own history. And so, what are these things? Well, there are what's called a bashi. Bashi is also used for the word for flute or pipe as well. And so you have it as a hollowed out, often chillum made out of clay. And then you probably are also familiar with the use of these same chillums more in the Shaiva Hindu context, which there's a whole tradition of Hindu Shaiva renunciates smoking out of chillums, especially in places like Nepal and other places in northeast India. And there's a colleague who's at the Center for the Study of World Religions now, Stuart Sarbacher, who's been writing on the wider history of this in India. And also Patricia Southoff has written on the use of cannabis in alchemy. So it goes way back there. But very, very seldomly is it studied in the context of Bangladesh and among Bāuls and Fakirs, which kind of represents in some way another stream in which this Siddhi Sheva practice has occurred. And so if you look at it closely, what you'll see that inside the chillum, you have what's known as a tigli, or this kind of clay cone that holds the tamuk mixture in and enables the mixture to be made. You have what's called a kak, which is like a wood plate of some kind, and that's to basically prepare the tamuk mixture. You have what's known as a katni or hand knife, which is used to slice the tamok mixture, and there are all kinds of different varieties. And if you go to any Bāul or Fakiri festival, you will find places, little small uh, sort of stalls, if you will, that people who are on the ground often selling these objects for people if they lost theirs or they need, need something, a new item. And then you also have, as a kind of charcoal, a ball of coconut hair or tsuba. And the tsuba is used by kind of rolling up the strands of coconut hair. And then it is lit by being attached to a stick, a thin metal stick for cleaning. So here's an interesting English word that's sort of crept its way in there. And then you also have what is mixed. So it's usually dried cannabis that is mixed with what's called alapata or shadapata. Which literally means white leaf. And it's a tobacco variant that then is mixed with cannabis very ritually. And it's done in exactly the correct proportions because if there's too much alapata, then it will become norom, which means soft. And if there's too little alapata, it will become kora, which means harsh. And I'll talk a little more about, how it's offered and so on. But if the sadhu doesn't like the mixture, if it's not the right proportions, then it can have actually social ramifications there. And so I talked about bashi, which can be used for various substances, including datura, but that's much less frequently. And then there's also this safi, the idea of a safi, which means pure or clean, which is also a filter that blocks saliva when the pipe is shared. So it's usually passed between person to person. And sadhus can also use their own gamsa, which is usually wrapped around their neck. And you really cannot survive long in these Bāul and Fakir environments without a gamsa. You use it for everything because you use it as a mat to sit on the floor at times. You'll use it as a towel to take baths, and then you can also use it as a safi to hold the chillum and smoke it as a filter. And so I mentioned the stick. And so, in these kinds of contexts, you'll see that in musical contexts where the instruments are played and people are gathered around for a Baul Onushan, you'll almost always see a bashi being passed around before the music or in between songs when the musicians are taking a break, when the artists or devotees are coming and going. And it's especially prominent at Mela. Mela means festival observance, and so you'll see it all the time at melas. And so just to kind of give you a sense of some of the important uses of this before songs, and that should say bashi. Sorry, I don't know, the diacritic is not displaying, but it should be the bashi is prepared by either a disciple of the presiding guru or a devotee or fan, bhakto. So that connects with bhakta, bhakti, you might have heard, which means devotion. It's a big, wide Indian category, and offered to the presiding guru. After the guru uses either the safi or their own gamsha to take one tan, pull or tug, it's given to the next person of honor and then usually passed circularly based on those in proximity. Refusing the bashi is also possible by respectfully placing both hands together and bringing them to the forehead. So usually someone will bring it like this and then pass it on. In smaller contexts, it can be used as a mode of instruction and positive reinforcement. And so if you're attached to a teacher and you're learning music or these songs from a teacher, since it is part of an oral tradition, there are written notebooks and publications, but you have to learn the songs really with a teacher to get the melodies correctly. It can be used as a mode of instruction. So if the student makes a mistake, based on interactions, or if they're talking too much, or saying the wrong things, or otherwise kind of acting out of line, the guru who prepares the siddhi seva can refuse to offer it to the student until he or she makes amends and returns to proper conduct. It's also performed socially when arriving at a place, and so as a mode of hospitality, when you go to a new place, whether that's a Sufi shrine or a Hindu cremation ground or a new kind of temple. Oftentimes, these contexts for the songs happen behind the official place, so like behind the temple or in a room that's sort of at the back of the shrine or something like that. Then people will normally offer a Siddhi Sheva as a sort of welcoming serving to start the conversation and start the welcome. But it also has a more sort of technical use in terms of the songs and in terms of the practice or sadhana itself. So according to Ferdowsi Fakirāni in an interview, its main use is to create a mind that is focused, nishtamon. And nishta is also used in the context of yoga. So yoga is another aspect here, as it's a big topic that we can talk about. But this word nishta is used in the context of samadhi, so like an ecstasy or trance, oftentimes, so like a steadfast or focused mind on the path of the Lord, Allah or Ishwara, and the context of God or Allah is also a very interesting topic in this tradition. We can talk about more. And for this, you need the proper motivation, uddesha. So it doesn't happen automatically, but you need the right kind of motivation for the practice of Siddhi Sheva. Otherwise, you might get lost. And Lalon's songs themselves actually address this. So in one song, you have this line. না জেনে ফকিয়াটা সিঁড়িতে পালালাম জোটা সার হলো ভাঙদোত্রা গোটা ভোজন সাধন সব চুলাতে ফের পলো তোর ফকিরিতে. So it's not knowing what it takes to become a fakir. I grew a head of matted hair. So like those kind of stock photos of the Shaiva sadhus that you saw earlier, there's sort of this image of the sadhu. And I'm not saying that people who dress in that certain way are not authentic or anything like that, but it has led to a sort of imitation of people copying the clothing, copying the hair, copying the lifestyle, but not really actually engaging in the practice or the sadhana. And so here Lalon is saying crushing bhang and Jimson weed or Datra became the focus of my life. My prayer and worship went up in smoke. Mine, something got in the way of your Fakir worship. And the Fakiri path is basically, in this case, a context for the synonym for the sadhana practice. And siddhi also has this wider use in the songs as well, such as this one. Ami ki tai janile sadhan siddhi hoy. আমি কথার অত ভারী আমাতে আরামি নাই আমি কি তাই জানিলে সাধন সিদ্ধি হয়. So here the word siddhi is used in the context of being complete. It's clearly not just talking about siddhi sheva as the practice of consuming the cannabis mixture. It's talking about actually being successful and accomplished in this practice. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by understanding the meaning of the word I. And the song goes on to mention Mansur al-Halaj and his famous saying that's attributed to him, An al-Hok, I am the truth. And so what is the I in that, and so on. And so in this third and final part of the talk, what I want to talk about is how this sort of practice of Siddhi Sheva is interpreted or viewed by the general public and sort of how it, has become framed as a kind of illicit activity among the public outside of these Bāul, Fakiri, and Sādhu communities. And the main word that you will hear is Gajjakor, which I put in the title of the talk just to sort of, in red lights. This is something that you will just hear all the time thrown around, Gajjakor, Gajjakor. So Gaja is related to the Sanskrit word Ganja-eater, and also it's a common English word. I don't know about Italian if ganja is made it in the parlance, but it means hemp or cannabis, basically. And then kor comes from the Persian word eater, drinker, or smoker. So basically the consumer of ganja in that way. And it's not a recent word, but it's been around at least since Hilali, who wrote this work, Perso-Arabic Elements in Bengali, has been recording these words. And so what do people think about ganja? And so I have the opportunity to talk to many Bengalis, but what's really nice is that I have my wife as well, who comes from a middle class family, working to middle class family in Dhaka. And so she has a really good idea of kind of mainstream Bangladeshi attitudes and cultures. And so in talking to her about her upbringing and, how people think about it, and is really enlightening. And so in an interview, what I heard from her is that there are two groups, ordinary people and sadhu people. And you won't hear gajakor among sadhus, which is correct in my own experience as well. But it's very normal to hear it pretty much everywhere else. And various people have various perspectives. And so some people, like her father, just say no. According to them, it's bad for everyone and just leads to destruction, dongsho of society. There's nothing that you can do to convince them that there's anything good in it at all or anything important. Some people, like her mom, who have a more Sufi leaning, might not take it themselves, but leave it to more personal discretion. Whatever they do is their matter. Whatever I do is my matter. And so she gave a quote from her mother, who was basically saying like, if they take it and they die, then let them die. It doesn't matter. But if it's good for them, then it's good for them. It's completely up to them. And she's been in contexts where it's been consumed around her, in the village context, and so it's just not a big deal. Others won't say it's totally good and not totally bad, which was kind of like her own position. And she knows from her aunt and uncle, who are also in the Bāul community, that sadhus believe it's very helpful to mood and songs and so on, which is also resonant with my own experience. And then among one group, it's halal, or pure or acceptable. Another is haram. The word ganjakor never, though, and this is what she said, which I think is important, it never has a positive sense. So it's never used as like a compliment, but it can be negative, extreme negative, or even funny negative. And so what are some of the funny negative? We can talk about the funny negative and then we can see the extreme negative. As in this post on Facebook, someone is sort of making a joke. And so you can see how there's also a gender component to it as well, women and men consuming ganja and what the kind of stigmas about this might be. And so this caption from a Facebook meme says, এরকম একটা গাঁজাখোর সুন্দরী নেশাগ্রস্ত মেয়ে পাইলে ভালোবাসা দিয়ে ভালো করে তুলতাম. So this guy is sarcastically saying that if I only found a gajakor, a beautiful consumer of ganja like this woman, then I would easily fall in love or something like that, which is sort of strange. It's sort of like a objectification in a way of a Bāul, a woman who is trying to, pursue this path on her own. But it also kind of shows you the stereotype of what a kind of person who consumes ganja would wear. If you notice, she has the gamsa here. She has flowers in her hair. She has very ornamental earrings. An ektara, which is the Bāul instrument, in her hand, and so on. And you can see it has 10,000 likes. So it's not just, this is something that could be culturally relatable. But there's also the extreme negative use of Gazakor, and this happened. So in last month in April, there was a mob killing, unfortunately, of a Sufi peer or teacher settler in Kushtia, which is the same area as Lalon Fakir, and his name was Shamim Al Jahangir. And what I noticed in sort of following this on the media and then also the Facebook comments is that this word came up there. Oitapir na gadzakor na Hindu kitsui budzlam na. So this means, is this a peer, like a Sufi leader, or is this just a Gadzakor, or is it a Hindu? Is he a Hindu? I don't understand anything. And then there's also this one here, Bhalo korse she Quran er kotabol bekano holo Gadzakor. So who gives, the mob was actually justified in killing this person because why should such a Gazakor talk about the Quran? Like that's unacceptable. We find out later that the YouTube video that was posted that led to this mob killing was actually not what he had originally said. It was mashed up comments that were meant to show him speaking bad of the Quran, when in fact he was talking about interpretations of the Quran and people who don't understand the commentarial tradition and so on. But it just kind of goes to show you that this became a very, very emotional issue. And it's related to the Bāul and Fakir universe because you have this idea of Bāuls who are often immersed or engaged in relationships and conversations with Sufi teachings, such as the Bāul artist Shofi Mondol, who is very famous. And you can even see here that Lalon's Akra hermitage used to be on this site where now above it has been erected a shrine or a mazar that looks very much like a Sufi shrine that you would find in northern India, like Ajmer or elsewhere. And so it's you find it in some other posts as well, like this one, Gaza kore থেকে ধর্মীয় শিক্ষা নিতে হবে সত্যি আমরা শেষ জামানায় রয়েছে এর থেকে বড় প্রমাণ আর কি হতে পারে. So here this person is saying that we've definitely reached the end of times because once people start learning religious teachers from a Gaza core, then we know that this is like proof of the end times, basically. So here's someone making a comment like that. How can we learn religious teachings from a Gadzakor? But then someone else is responding with these memes saying that actually we shouldn't distinguish between Jat. And he was coming from more of a Shia position. But at the same time, it's interesting to say that this person is saying the differences that people are making between various birth groups or birth religions is more dangerous in society than a cobra, essentially, a poisonous cobra. So you have this kind of interesting, interplay in the public discourse and in digital spaces as well. And one thing that I'd want to mention before I get to the conclusion is that one thing that's really interesting about the extreme negative of the kind of Gazapur and the killing is that you see many people are laugh reacting here on Facebook. And so one thing that you'll see often is when a tragedy occurs, the laugh react becomes a sort of really almost a kind of poisonous thing to disregard or dismiss a person as not worthy of attention or their practices are not worthy of attention. And that relates to the Gadzakor who can then be dismissed and put in a kind of category. Not at all considering the first part of what I was mentioning in the talk, siddhi sevā, where this practice of sharing the pipe and enjoying it together in community or to facilitate music, that's completely swept aside. So, what do we see here in conclusion? Seva among Bāuls is not just an act of service to a guru, but a serving of a substance used to collectively interact and mark time in social or individual contexts. So, people will move from one Siddhi Seva to the next Siddhi Seva. They'll move from Siddhi Seva to a serving of tea to then a serving of fruit. I even was in a context where someone offered me Pringles and they opened the can of Pringles and everyone passed around the Pringle can and we each took a Pringle out and ate a Pringle. And so it has that kind of that context as well. And it's really linked to the idea when we talk about service of this Bāul and Fakir idea of manush bhojan, worship of human beings, as well as love in general. And so when you're serving other people, you're recognizing the humanity of the other person. And that's part of this worship of human beings there. Yet the dominant view of cannabis as an illicit substance or nesha, which means addictive substance, or even aboido, illegal, in the two Bengals and as well and overrides artistic and practitioner perspectives on its intended usage as a ritual serving. Practitioner perspectives may be innovative, but also have their roots in documented uses of cannabis in both Hindu and Islamic contexts. Yet these are now being ignored in the interest of stigmatizing, harassing, and even killing political or religious opponents. Taking such perspectives seriously can shed light on the wider indological importance of Sheva as a practice and its overlooked intersection with the category of mysticism and ritual practice more broadly. So I think I will leave it there for now, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Keith. That was a great, very interesting talk. I'll leave the floor open for questions. Are there any questions for Keith? I have a couple myself, but I'll let others go first. Okay, if there aren't any questions, maybe we can get the conversation started. There was a lot in there that I think is
Mhm.
really interesting, both from the perspective of kind of ritual practice, but then also from the perspective of the illicit. So,
Mhm.
one of the questions I have is related to kind of the first part of your talk. So, the Bashi, can you tell us
Mhm.
a little bit more about the kind of material context in which they're circulating, the economic context, who's making them, Also, are they made for a particular person? Do they get handed down? Do they become sacred objects in themselves? Do they carry apotropaic properties? Do they have other things like that? How does the kind of materiality of the bashi work in that
Sure. Great question. So there's only evidence of use of bashi sort of post maybe 15th, 16th century. And there's some debate even of whether people were smoking anything at all in India up in, before the 12th century. There's evidence that people were consuming bhang or other, substances, including cannabis before then, but the smoking technology seems to have entered through some of the Sufi settlers, as well as it might even have roots. There's a colleague, Adam, I'm forgetting his last name right now, who has argued that the idea of even smoking through a pipe in this context might originally be from East Africa and traveled through kind of Sufi networks there. So it's something I'm still doing some research on as well. But the materiality of the Bashi, even if we take it to only be a few centuries old, it's still used and made using commonly available village objects, so clay. So the older forms typically are mati. Mati means clay, and so it's easy to make a clay cup or a clay plate or so on. And so it's just as easy to make the clay bashi if you have the right implements. I'm not a pottery expert, but it's very, it seems like it's a very easy thing to make for the most part. And then the tikli as well is made out of clay as well that holds the material in. It's not usually passed down from guru to teacher. There's usually someone who has a kit, but because they're so widely available, you could get another one, or once one kind of gets used up, you can get another one. Some of them some of them are bigger than others, and some seem to be made out of kind of more of a stone-like material. Some of them that are even circulating, I saw one in southeastern Bangladesh actually has three chambers in there. So there are big, and smaller ones. The ones that are typically used among the Bāuls and Fakirs only have one chamber, and they are made out of clay or this other stone clay mixture substance. And they, yeah, can you remind me, was there another question in there? The apple portrayal maybe, or?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That is there a certain sense of, for example, if you had the object from, let's say, a famous um, ritual specialist or something like that, that there would be some kind of apotropaic properties associated with it, or some kind of protective force or sacred quality to the object simply by virtue of it coming from somebody else. I mean, is there any, you know,
Hmm.
discourse around, I have, the bashi of such and such person or something like this, where it, kind of through contiguity or something has this kind of value attributed to it.
Sure, that's a good question, and I'd have to say the answer is no. I haven't come across that, and I have come across it with other objects. So it's interesting that it doesn't have to do with the bashi. The other objects where I have seen that is the Sādhu or the Bāul's ektara. The musical instrument is usually seen to be important and passed down, or their dotara, for example. Where it's also important is their sometimes they'll have a staff or a small little baton, the alati, that is usually kind of a marker of authority of them as a sadhu. So that will be important. And there's a museum, a small little museum next to where Lalon, the most famous fakir, where he had his ashram or hermitage, akra. And in that space, you have some objects that were clearly important to Lalon, but the Bashi is not among them. Yeah.
It's very interesting. um
Mm.
other questions, anybody want to raise something? Yes,
Yeah,
Francesco.
the tension with the Islamic communities. Was it with the Salafi communities, Wahhabi, or mainstream Sunnah Islam?
Yeah, so you mean in the last part of the talk, the kind of
Yeah,
mob
exactly.
the issues? Yeah, so There's some debate about that. So the Daily Star published an article that did say that the mastermind between the attack, who was arrested, and so they are being sort of brought to, brought to justice in a kind of way because of that, did have connections to Jamaat Islami, which is a political party that now forms the most significant minority in Bangladesh. But at the same time, it's important to be cautious because not all Jamaat Islami favor that. They definitely don't favor violence or mob violence or anything like that. And so it could be a case of an individual who had that affiliation, but then was also engaged in his own kind of vigilante tactics or so on, or what have you. Although the tendency is certainly to stress the reformist aspects of Islam. And by reformist aspects, I mean this idea that you do not pay any respect to the Sufi teaching in which you have a murshid or a guide. And so in Bangladesh, especially, there are many, many sites. They're called mazars. You probably have encountered them in other contexts, Francesco, but mazar is the word in Bangladesh, which means shrine. And at these mazars, people will come and they will pay their respects to a dead Sufi leader. And so there's a whole culture that basically builds up around these mazars and these shrines. And from the reformist side, they want to really do away with that. They don't see that as compatible with with the reformist Islam that they want to practice. So they just want to kind of go through the the five pillars. And you could say, I think there's a link with Deobandi Islam as well if you go back 100 years. But it's nothing new. It's just at this context, I think they have a lot more power than they have had in years past. And so if you go back 100 years, you'll see these groups issuing fatwas for the destruction of Bāuls and so on. But I think now it's at a point where it's kind of there's a lot more courage or this kind of lack of fear of repercussion than there was in years past. Yeah.
Other questions? Thank you, Francesco.
Mm-hmm.
Others?
I have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one is kind of simple. If you can kind of describe a little bit more what is this white leaves? So this mixing of tobacco, because I don't understand if it is a kind of preparation, a preparation of the tobacco leaves with cannabis, or if it is a graft, like a mixing, a plant. I don't know. And the other question is a reflection about this thing that you said that is so fascinating. This idea of that it is a mode of instruction. It is something that I also encountered in my field work with ayahuasca in Brazil. It is the fact that these substances are used also in a pedagogical way. That challenge a lot this idea that they are drugs, illicit drugs, etc., because there are a lot of, let's say, behaviors and rules and norms around the use of these substances. So in this case that you said, there is when you can and when you can't. Like if you don't behave in a good way, so you will not have access to the sacred substance. But they are also like teachers. So, for example, with ayahuasca, sometimes children that are allowed to have ayahuasca in certain specific moments, there is this kind of, if you don't behave well, I will give you a glass of ayahuasca. You will see how you have to behave well in front of God and that kind of things, right? So, yeah, this mode of extraction is something that turns upside down the notion and all the meanings that the illicit have.
Yes, two very great questions, and I can address them. So, with regard to the first, the white leaf is really, really interesting because it's not talked about. You won't find really much information about it online. It's very hard to even find biological information about, what kind of tobacco is this because most Bāuls and Fakirs will not want to smoke ordinary tobacco or even pipe tobacco, which I had brought at one time. It's kind of treated in a different category, and most of them frown on cigarettes as well, although, there's exceptions to everyone, right? So this particular leaf, though, the alapata or shadapata, it must be in the kind of tobacco family because it comes in these leaves that are really, really big, and it's dried out and it's sold openly at the market or the bazaar. And it's sort of the ultimate gateway drug, I guess, if you will, since it's used in the pan, the betel leaf mixtures. And so many, many villagers who aren't even, remotely associated with Bāuls or Fakirs, they will use it in their pan as a kind of zorda, the kind of a stimulant within the pan to increase its qualities. And then it's also used in beedi production. So local beedis, beedis are these sort of hand rolled, usually rolled with a leaf. But nowadays in Bangladesh, it's usually rolled in paper. So there's a whole kind of cottage industry of these beedis that are easily available. But in the context of the siddhi sevā, the alapata is mixed basically with the dried cannabis leaves, and you make a roll in it in the palm of your hand, wrapping it with a little bit of the alapata, and then you use the cut and the cutney, the wooden board and the knife to sort of slice different edges. And you do that at least 3 or 4 times. So it's very it's not easy to do. I mean, you'd have to really dedicate. It'd be much easier just to smoke, I don't know, a joint or something, but that's not what they do. So you'd prepare it in this way with the right mixtures until it's ground into a very, very fine powder. And once it's ground into the very fine powder, then it is mixed and put into the bashi. Then the coconut hair is lit, and people will pass it. So it's not a grafted plant. It's actually two plants that are mixed together, similar to, I guess, a spliff is the terminology, in English. So that's with regard to the plant. But it's very interesting that this plant is not really widely talked about or used and has this kind of separate quality, even though it's related to tobacco. As far as the pedagogy is concerned, yeah, that's also a very understudied and very interesting aspect. And in my personal experience in wanting to learn the songs, which I outline in that ethnography chapter, but which really is part of what made me interested in this practice and tradition, even to later study it academically, was this sort of fact that it was part of a teach. It kind of drew me in as a way. And I knew that I could always make my own, even if I didn't want to listen to the teacher, or if I didn't want to listen to my instructor in the songs at that time. I could always just kind of go do it on my own, but it wasn't the same. And it wasn't as fulfilling in a way. And so I knew that my teacher at the time, who I'm still in close contact with, his name is Bidan, and I could tell that Bidan was happy because he would basically, be more willing to share the Siddhi Sheva with me. And I could tell that he was angry when he would sit on his own and not offer it to me as a kind of practice. And so what I kind of gathered from that too is it wasn't just me, but it was also in wider, bigger social contexts when the Siddhi Sheva was prepared. If someone was kind of ostracized for whatever reason that day, like someone was not acting rightly, or there were people who were angry at that person for that day, they would often even skip them with the pipe, or like people would be less likely to hand them the pipe during that day. And so it was an interesting kind of way of also, creating inclusion. And as I mentioned in the talk as well, the presiding guru, and so in this case, often this was Bidan's guru, Humayun Sādhu, and Humayun Sādhu would often be the first person to be offered the siddhi seva after someone else had prepared it. And so then there's this kind of idea of a kind of a ranking a little bit, but then after that, it becomes equal and people just kind of pass around. So it's not that everyone's like, oh, you're number one, you're number two, you're three and four. But it has this pedagogical component since people are marking time, they're often traveling together, they are learning these songs together. And so if you're close on the path in the sadhana or in the practice, or if you're making improvements, if you're making progress, if good things are happening, then you'll be more likely to be accepted and welcomed and get, the first or second turn of the Siddhi Sheva rather than be skipped entirely. So it is a motivating factor in a weird way. It sounds petty, but it is a motivating factor. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Keith, for this wonderful presentation and discussion. And we'll be in touch with everyone about our next talk, which will be by Kim Stratton, I think on the 4th of June, and we'll circulate that information in the coming week or so. So again, join me in thanking Keith again for a wonderful conversation and talk, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.